August the 19th. 4:40 a.m. the squirrel hunting talk of the day. You know, there's all kinds of people out there. The non-believers, the ignorant. The year was 1979. Christmas morning. About 9 o'clock in the morning. I was 17 years old. Hadn't had a driver's license for a car for about a year. I was in my father's pickup truck. Me and my brother. There's this deer standing on top of the ridge, and we had our first deer rifles. Sold. We bought them at Sears. I can't remember what we give for them. I think we give about $119 a piece for them. Lever action 30-30s. Open sights. Shit, we couldn't afford scopes. Scopes back then, you know, they cost quite a bit. So I see this deer standing on top of this ridge. Didn't have a rangefinder. Lasers? Well, I didn't know nobody have no damn laser. So I drew down on this deer with this 30-30 rifle with open sights. Aimed over his back, touched the trigger. He fell over. You could hear the bullet hit. Went straight down. 5-point buck. Now I guesstimate, and I've been through this area before, or since. Alright. I guess this distance to be about 175 yards. Alright. I didn't know how much that gun was going to drop, but I was smart enough at 17 years old, I knowed it was going to drop, okay? And some of the people around here, you know, older, that had more money than I did. 30-06 was a pretty popular round back then. 7mm Magnums never hit this part of the country yet. It was 243s, and 30-06 was probably the biggest being shot around here for distance at that time. And when we looked at the deer, it was practically a perfect shot, but it was steep angle. Alright, meaning it was lower on one side of the deer versus the other, and it went through him that far, if you can believe that shit. 150 grain bullet. 30-30s were not known to be long range deer cartridges, okay? But I had an eyewitness. Of course, there were some people, you know, I had this one person. Oh, that ain't that far. Yeah, my ass. Starting around the year 2004, I started shooting a 17 HMR. I shot it for 5 years, and I sold it to the man who lives up above me up here. And I think he has sold that gun just as of late. And this is a good shooter, too. 17 VMAX. So I was up at his house one day with that gun. And he had a guy up there that leased land from him, older fella, older than me. He just died here not too long ago. He had a 22 Hornet. Alright. So he pulls up on his side-by-side. It was getting close to deer season. He was up here getting his little cabin squared away. He rode up on his four-wheeler. And I had that 17 HMR giving this landowner up here that I sold this gun to, him and his brother-in-law, a demo. They couldn't believe what I was telling them. So they took this can across the holler, in facing me, and I shot it 3 times. The holes were all practically touching cloverleaf. Okay? And I just took rest, kneeling down off the top of the man's side by side. Well, before I shot it, this man from East Tennessee, he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm fixing to shoot this gun right here." And he seen that boy's son-in-law. He's the one who took the can over there across this holler and put it up on the side of the hill. And I had a laser at that time. I knowed how far it was, 100 yards. And when I said, "I'm fixing to shoot this gun," he seen him hanging that can up over there in that bush. He started laughing. He said, "That gun will never reach that far." I said, "It'll not only reach that far," I said, "you just watch, I'm fixing to show you something." So I showed him, He thought his Hornet was about the only thing 22-wise, you could get over there with. Well, I shot his 22 Hornet about 3 years later. I shot that thing at 100 yards, and that son of a bitch shot so bad it shot around corners, and I'm not bullshitting you. Biggest piece of shit I ever seen, a Browning. So it wasn't much longer, about 2 or 3 more years passed by. This man, he lives over by my other house I own. I used to go down here at this country store. It's closed up since. There's always some talking going on, And them boys down there know that I squirrel hunted. Now, they're all older than me, but now this is 20 years ago. 17 years ago. So I was a little younger then, And I just didn't mean anything really by it other than, I said, well, I've been shooting a lot of squirrels out to about 125 yards. And this one guy that owns this land over here, he sold it since. The one I referred to earlier, he said, "Well, you can't even see a squirrel that far. You can't even see a squirrel at 125. I can see a fox squirrel in the woods with my naked eye at 125 yards easy. If he's moving around a little bit, and you're around a food tree like a walnut, I got this one uncle that I seen about 4 years ago who was a big squirrel hunter back in this time, but now he's 82. He just turned 82. I don't think he hunts much anymore. I haven't seen him in a while. 4 or 5 years ago, I seen him. And I had that I didn't show him the gun. I had the ammunition in my pocket. So I showed him this 17 HM2. I had a box of that CCI, I believe. I said, "Yeah," I said, "I've been plugging squirrels with this thing routinely at 100, 125 yards. His eyes rolled. Like I was bullshitting him. See, you see what I'm talking about? And then you get those lunatics like over there on the Rimfire Central, they don't even know some of them guys don't even know what hunting is. I was telling them about the squirrels, I'd been a killing, and making some reference sometimes to some distant shots. Naturally you had the same type over there, well, this guy's full of shit, bullshitter. Well, that trigger cam and that digital camera that I started using, I tried to say, well, let's just show these boys, talk's cheap, let's show them. So you've been seeing me with that trigger cam, with that HM2 rifle over the last year or so. You've been seeing me with that air rifle, giving you some little demos. And everything I say in them videos as far as the yardage is as close as I can get using a laser. Alright? And all the squirrels that I've shot that I've commented on the distance, Some are lasered after the fact. Some are before the fact. Them real long shots are always before the fact because you don't want to be trying to shoot a 110 or 25 yard squirrel with a 17 HM2 or that air rifle unless you laser them. Now the 17 HMR that I shot for about 5 years, I didn't laser a squirrel that I shot with that thing. Didn't have to. The way it shot, and I knew how it shot because I looked at it with a laser. I didn't need a laser with that thing. Okay. But I didn't shoot at too many squirrels with the 17 HMR out past 125 yards. And I didn't really have as good a scope on it. I think I had a Weaver V16 on it. That's what I used with a fine crosshair. I wouldn't like that now, okay? That crosshair is hard to see. My eyes are a little older than they used to be. So you got all kinds of people out there, okay? And some are ignorant. Some don't want to believe what they hear. And some don't even think it's even possible. Okay. And yeah, there are bullshitters out there. They're out there. Some actually try to be copycats of somebody that can do it, and they say they can do it, and they really can't do it. You know? But that goes with about everything in life when you think about it. So I try to show you all some stuff to take into account and what's possible with the right skill set and the right experience. Okay? Does any shooter ever miss? Every shooter that's ever shot a gun misses, okay? Some miss more than others, or some miss less than others. And some shots do allow for some error. Thank goodness for that, huh? And you got to maximize that. That's one of the things about shooting a rifle at a squirrel or an air rifle at a squirrel at distance. There's some things you can do to maximize your odds. Squirrel orientation is a biggie. Okay? A squirrel laying up and down on the side of a tree, that's the shot at longer distance that's going to probably yield better odds versus one that's hunched up or laying horizontal. Yeah, that one that's laying horizontal on that limb, that's the one I like to go after. Because I could use the squirrel's body, stretch it out for shooter arrow and wind hold. Okay? And this goes even for a lower powered air rifle shooting pellets, by the way. Okay? Maximize your potential with the gun for probability by looking at the squirrel's orientation if you can. You would do the same thing with a deer. You wouldn't want a deer facing you, shooting him at 400 yards with a rifle, would you? You'd want him broadside if you could get that shot, wouldn't you? Slightly cornering towards you or away from you. So that's what you got to do when you're shooting. All that stuff gets thrown into the equation, and you know, time is ticking, the clock is ticking. And when you do get the shot, you got to make the shot count. Some shots with a rifle, One thing I like about that Impact M4, now the 17 HM2s that I shoot, truth be told, now think about it, the 17 HM2 round is faster than this Impact M4 round. But here's what I suspect. What happens inside that gun, that Impact M4, versus what happens inside that 17 HM2 barrel CZ457. They used to have a term for it, I believe, rack delay time or some shit like that. Well, the HM2 is faster, but from what I'm seeing, this Impact M4, when you get on the trigger of that gun, whatever happens inside that gun, and to get that projectile out of that barrel seems to be happening pretty quick, time-wise. And I'm bringing this up because it seems to me you can do a better time, you can do a pretty good time shot with that Impact M4. And you can do a pretty good time shot with this 17 Mach 2. Different actions, different trigger setups. But now if I shot a 22 long rifle barreled CZ457, it wouldn't be as good at doing time shots, would it? You know what I'm talking about, right? You're not exactly steady on the target. You're sort of shooting the target based on what you see in the scope for time as the crosshair passes. So the 22 long rifle CZ457 may not be as good even as this Impact M4, even though it's traveling slightly slower at the end of the barrel, muzzle velocity. But there's no powder to be burned in that Impact M4, unlike a 22 long rifle. So you've got the mechanical mechanism having to be engaged. The powder is being burned. The barrel is 21 inches long. So you don't have to be one of these, you know, you can do time shots in the woods. And sometimes that's what I have to do. I did that thing yesterday on that hickory nut, okay? I was in a bind against that truck. Trying to see that nut in that tree from 100, that tree where that nut was sitting was 128 according to the laser, or thereabouts. Yeah, in the wild, your shots are not necessarily textbook. But the question is, are they good enough to harvest the animal? Well, you may not never know this sitting on a bench if that's all you do. You would maybe never know, would you? Well, I got me that little shooting table, and I've been playing with it a little bit this year. Never had a shooting table, boys. My whole damn life, I never had nothing worth of shit to shoot off of but makeshift bullshit. But that actually helps when you think about it, because when you go to the woods, that's what happens a lot of times. You got to make do with what you got. You know, I never used to pack no trigger stick. When I used that 17 HMR on squirrels, I never used no trigger stick. Never owned one, never had one. I just I'd lay down and shoot prone through them swells around the hills out there at 100, 125 yards. Never took a squirrel bag with me, always hung them on a stick. Never had a shooting stick. Till I made this long fiberglass pole, I never owned a shooting stick that I took to the squirrel woods, ever. I'd shoot off of trees, fences, off the ground, offhanded, you name it. But I never used a gun back in the day as heavy. I guess that HMR rifle, that Savage, was probably the heaviest squirrel gun that I ever used up until that point. Prior, I'd never used nothing that heavy. You know, it was sort of heavy. But that was a good shooting gun. So yeah, a good place to practice for your squirrel hunting is a sycamore tree. Find you a sycamore tree. Get about 50, 60, 70 yards from that. Them big old balls hanging off of that. Well, they're not that big. If you get to where you can move them when you hit that trigger on that gun or disintegrate them, you'll know you're doing the right thing. Hey? Yeah, that's what I used to shoot as a kid. If I found me a sycamore tree and them things hangs on for a while, that's what I used to enjoy shooting, even with an open-sighted rifle. Anyway, that is going to conclude the squirrel hunting talk of the day. A little history for you folks.